Did you realize your partner's crazy ex was actually telling the truth about them? I thought Jessica was just bitter. For 2 years, she'd been sending me messages on Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Always the same warnings about my boyfriend Marcus. He's not who you think he is. Ask him about the restraining order. Check his phone while he sleeps. I'd show Marcus the messages, and he'd get this perfect mixture of hurt and exhaustion on his face. She's been stalking me since we broke up, he'd explain, running his hands through his hair. I feel terrible that she's dragging you into this. He painted her as unhinged, said she'd keyed his car, showed up at his work, threatened suicide when he wouldn't take her back. Classic crazy ex behavior, right? Marcus was incredible. He brought me coffee every morning, remembered every detail I shared, and never once raised his voice. When I got food poisoning, he held my hair back and cleaned my bathroom without complaint. When my mom was hospitalized, he drove 4 hours with me and slept in those terrible waiting room chairs. Perfect boyfriend material. The way we met felt like destiny. I was having the worst day at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. 3 patients coded, 2 families screaming at staff, and I'd spilled coffee all over my scrubs during my lunch break. I was crying in the parking garage when this handsome stranger approached with a tissue and a concerned smile. Rough day? Marcus asked gently. I was embarrassed to be sobbing in public, but something about his warm brown eyes made me feel safe. He listened while I vented about my terrible shift, never once checking his phone or looking impatient. You're incredible for doing what you do, he said when I finished. The world needs more people like you. He asked for my number and I gave it without hesitation. Our first date was perfect. A quiet restaurant where he asked thoughtful questions about my work, my dreams, my family. He seemed genuinely fascinated by everything I said. I've never met anyone as compassionate as you, he told me over dessert. You have this light about you. By our third date, I was completely smitten. Marcus was attentive without being clingy, romantic without being cheesy, supportive without being patronizing. He remembered that I was lactose intolerant and always ordered dairy-free options. He knew I worked double shifts on Wednesdays and would leave encouraging texts to get me through the day. When he first mentioned his crazy ex, it was in the context of apologizing for being cautious about relationships. Jessica really did a number on me, he said sadly during our 1-month anniversary dinner. She made me feel like I couldn't trust my own judgment about people. He described a woman who'd become increasingly possessive and paranoid during their relationship, how she'd accused him of cheating with no evidence, how she'd go through his phone and interrogate him about female coworkers. I tried to be patient because I thought she just needed reassurance, Marcus explained. But it got scary. She'd show up at my apartment at 3 a.m. demanding to know where I'd been. She threatened to hurt herself if I ever left her. When Jessica's first message arrived 2 months into our relationship, Marcus's reaction seemed perfectly reasonable. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, he said, showing genuine distress. I was hoping she'd moved on, but apparently not. The message was vague. Just ask him about Seattle with no context. Marcus explained that Jessica often made cryptic accusations that never led anywhere. She does this thing where she implies I'm hiding something without actually saying what, he said with a tired sigh. It's manipulation. She wants you to start doubting me, so our relationship falls apart. Over the next few months, Jessica's messages became more frequent, but remained frustratingly vague. Marcus always had reasonable explanations. Ask him about the second phone came when Marcus had just gotten a work phone from his consulting company. Ask him about the credit cards arrived right after Marcus mentioned having to clean up his credit after identity theft. Ironically, he claimed Jessica had stolen his information during their relationship. Ask him about Portland made no sense because Marcus had never mentioned Portland, and when I brought it up, he seemed genuinely confused. I've never even been to Portland, he said, frowning. Why would she say that? I started to feel sorry for Marcus. Jessica's harassment was clearly causing him pain, and it was affecting our relationship too. Every message made me feel like I was being pulled into their toxic history. But Jessica's messages kept coming, more specific each time. Ask him why he has 2 phones. Ask him about the credit cards and his dead father's name. Ask him about Rebecca in Portland. I mentioned Rebecca casually one night while we were cooking dinner. Marcus was telling me about his day at work, laughing about a difficult client, when I said, speaking of difficult people, Jessica mentioned someone named Rebecca today. Marcus went completely still. The wooden spoon he'd been using to stir pasta sauce clattered against the pot. Where did you hear that name? His voice changed. Flat. Cold. Nothing like the warm tone I was used to. Just around, I said carefully, suddenly aware that the temperature in the room had shifted. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, before forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Must be thinking of someone else. But I wasn't thinking of someone else. And I started paying attention. Marcus did have 2 phones. He claimed one was for work, but he guarded it like classified information. He received calls at odd hours and would step outside to answer them, even in winter. When I'd joke about his secret agent behavior, he'd laugh it off but never change the pattern. I also noticed how he'd positioned himself in our relationship. Gradually, subtly, he'd become my everything. My friends found him charming, but somehow I was seeing them less and less. Marcus always had thoughtful reasons why. Emma's been really negative lately, he'd say after I hung up with my best friend. I worry she's projecting her relationship problems onto you. Your mom seems stressed when you visit, he'd observe after family dinners. Maybe giving her some space would be healthier for both of you. He never forbade me from seeing anyone. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd plant seeds of doubt that grew until I was making the choice to isolate myself. One night, while he was in the shower, I checked his work phone. I told myself I was just being paranoid, influenced by Jessica's messages. I'd proved to myself that Marcus was innocent, then maybe I could block Jessica and move on with our relationship. The contact list made my blood run cold. Rebecca, Portland Ashley, Seattle Nina, San Diego Melissa, Phoenix Emma, Denver Katie, Austin. And at the bottom, Jessica, blocked. Each contact had the same pattern, dozens of deleted message threads. Recent calls at 2 a.m. Photos sent and received. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through Rebecca's messages. When are you coming back? You said just 6 months. I saw your girlfriend on Instagram. Does she know about us? Marcus, I'm pregnant. Please answer my calls. I need to know what to tell the baby. The doctor says I'm having complications. I'm scared. The timestamps showed these messages were from last week, while Marcus was supposedly on a business trip to Milwaukee. I scrolled through more conversations. Ashley in Seattle was planning their anniversary trip for next month. Nina in San Diego was asking when he'd be transferring to the California office permanently. Emma in Denver was upset because he'd missed her birthday dinner. Each woman seemed to believe she was in a committed, exclusive relationship with Marcus. The shower was still running. I screenshotted everything I could before putting the phone back exactly where I found it. When Marcus came out, towel around his waist, water still dripping from his hair, he looked perfectly normal, kissed my forehead, asked if I wanted to watch a movie. You seem tense, he said, settling beside me on the couch. Everything okay? I felt like I was living with a stranger. Just tired, I managed. He pulled me closer, stroking my hair with the same gentle touch I'd fallen in love with. You work too hard, he murmured. Let me take care of you. The words that used to comfort me now made my skin crawl. How many other women had he said those exact words to? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully beside me. Every breath he took sounded ominous. Every movement made me tense. Who was this person lying next to me? The next morning, I called in sick and drove to Jessica's address. I'd found it in his contacts under blocked with a note that said, emergency only, approach with caution. The apartment complex was nicer than I'd expected. Jessica answered the door looking nothing like the unhinged woman Marcus had described. Professional clothes, neat apartment, wedding ring on her finger. You finally believe me, she said simply. She made coffee and spread out a manila folder on her kitchen table. The folder was thick, organized with tabs and labels. This wasn't the obsessive rambling of a crazy ex. This was documentation. Marcus operates in cycles, she explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. He finds women in different cities, maintains relationships with 3 or 4 at once. He tells each of us the others are crazy exes or clingy friends. She showed me credit card statements and names I didn't recognize. Identity theft. He uses information from women he's dated to open accounts. My credit score dropped 200 points before I figured out what was happening. My stomach dropped. There's more, Jessica said gently. And it's worse than financial fraud. She pulled out police reports, hospital records, restraining orders. The first police report was from Seattle. Ashley Martinez, 28, nurse practitioner, admitted to hospital with injuries consistent with domestic violence. Suspect fled before arrest could be made. The second was from San Diego. Nina Rodriguez, 26, elementary school teacher. Restraining order filed after escalating threats and stalking behavior. The third was from Denver. Emma Thompson, 29, social worker. Identity theft, harassment, violation of restraining order. Marcus has a pattern, Jessica said quietly. He gets women isolated, financially dependent, then the abuse starts. Psychological first, then physical. The documents painted a horrifying picture. 3 different women in 3 different cities, all with similar stories of manipulation, control, and violence. Rebecca's in the hospital right now, Jessica said quietly. Broken ribs, fractured wrist, concussion. She finally pressed charges, but he disappeared before they could arrest him. She showed me hospital photos that made me sick. Rebecca looked like me. Same hair color, same build, same age, same trusting smile in the before photos Jessica had printed from social media. He has a type, Jessica continued. Mid-20s, works in healthcare or education, lives alone, family out of state. He researches us thoroughly before making contact. She showed me printouts from social media accounts I'd forgotten I had, dating profiles from years ago, public record searches, even my college graduation photo from a newspaper announcement my mom had submitted. How long have you been living together? She asked. 6 months. She nodded grimly. That's when it escalates. He's probably already isolated you from friends and family. I thought about the past few months, how Marcus had subtly discouraged girls' nights out, how he'd find reasons I shouldn't visit my parents. They were too demanding, the drive was too long, I needed to focus on my career. How he'd expressed concern about friends he claimed were toxic, or using me. Emma, my best friend since nursing school, had stopped calling after Marcus mentioned she seemed jealous of our relationship. My weekly calls with my mother had dwindled to monthly, then every few months. Marcus was always supportive when I talked to them, but somehow I always felt drained afterward, like the conversations were more work than they were worth. The restraining orders don't work because he moves constantly, Jessica explained. Uses different names, different cities. By the time law enforcement catches up, he's already moved on to the next victim. She handed me a thick folder marked Sarah Chen, Chicago. I've been documenting everything for 2 years, building a case. Rebecca isn't his first victim to end up hospitalized, and she won't be the last unless we stop him. Inside the folder were copies of medical records, police reports, and testimony from 7 different women across 4 states. The pattern was identical every time. Love bombing phase, excessive attention, gifts, and affection, making the victim feel special and chosen. Isolation phase, gradually separating the victim from support systems through manipulation and subtle sabotage. Control phase, financial manipulation, monitoring communications, restricting movements. Abuse phase, psychological torture escalating to physical violence. Disposal phase, when the victim becomes too problematic or starts to fight back, he disappears and moves to the next target. The other women are ready to testify, Jessica said, but we need current evidence, something that proves he's still active, still targeting victims. She looked at me directly. We need you to help us catch him. My hands were trembling as I processed everything. 2 years of warnings I'd dismissed. 2 years of red flags I'd ignored because Marcus was so charming, so perfect. What do you need me to do? Jessica explained the plan. The FBI had been building a case for interstate fraud and stalking, but they needed concrete evidence of ongoing crimes. I would continue acting normal while documenting everything: his activities, his phones, his finances, his communications with other victims. Agent Rodriguez is the lead investigator, Jessica said, handing me a business card. She's been tracking Marcus for 3 years. You can call her anytime, day or night. The moment you feel unsafe, you leave, Jessica emphasized. Promise me. This isn't worth your life. I promised. But as I drove home, I wondered how I'd even know when I was unsafe. Marcus had never hurt me physically. He'd never even raised his voice. Everything dangerous about him was hidden beneath layers of charm and manipulation. Marcus was making dinner when I walked in, humming along to jazz music like he didn't have a care in the world. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs. He'd opened a bottle of wine and lit candles. "How was work, baby?" he asked, kissing my cheek with the same gentle affection as always. I forced a smile. "Fine, just tired." "I made your favorite," he said, gesturing to the stir-fry. "Thought we could eat and watch that documentary you mentioned." He was so normal, so loving. For a moment, I almost convinced myself Jessica was wrong. Maybe this was all an elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe Marcus really was the victim of a vindictive ex. Then I noticed his phone buzzing on the counter, Rebecca calling. Marcus saw me looking and smoothly flipped the phone face down. "Spam calls," he said casually. "Been getting them all day." But I'd seen the name. And I knew Rebecca was in the hospital with broken ribs, wondering why the father of her unborn child had disappeared. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe beside me. This man who brought me flowers, who remembered my coffee order, who held me when I cried about difficult patients at work. This man who was apparently a predator. The next few weeks were torture. I documented everything while pretending nothing had changed. His second phone, his odd hours, his carefully crafted stories about work trips that I now knew were visits to other victims. I discovered he'd been using my personal information too. My social security number to run credit checks, my mother's maiden name to set up email accounts, my work address to have packages delivered that I never saw. He'd been systematically invading my privacy for months, and I'd never noticed because I trusted him completely. I installed a hidden camera app on my phone and started recording our conversations. The casual way he lied was chilling. When I asked about his trip to Milwaukee, he described meetings and clients that I now knew were fabricated. He was actually in Portland with Rebecca. "How was the Johnson account?" I asked over dinner. "Challenging," he said without missing a beat. "But I think we made good progress." The presentation went over well. He was such a good liar that I almost believed him myself. I also started paying attention to his stories about his past. Details that had seemed unimportant before now raised red flags. He claimed to be from Ohio, but his accent sometimes slipped into something that sounded more like Texas. He said his father had died in a car accident, but I'd heard him mention his father in present tense during phone calls. When I mentioned these inconsistencies, he always had explanations. The accent was from childhood friends. He still talked about his father in present tense because he missed him so much. Plausible, sympathetic, completely believable. I called Agent Rodriguez and set up a meeting. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who treated me with the kind of careful compassion reserved for trauma victims. "You're very brave for coming forward," she said in her FBI field office. "Marcus Webb, that's his real name, by the way, is one of the most sophisticated predators we've encountered." She showed me his file. Real name, Marcus Webb, born in Texas, age 34. History of fraud, identity theft, and domestic violence dating back to college. At least 12 known victims over 8 years. He's highly intelligent and extremely good at reading people, Agent Rodriguez explained. He studies his targets for weeks before making contact. Everything about your relationship was calculated. She showed me surveillance photos of Marcus watching me before our chance meeting in the parking garage. Photos of him at the coffee shop where I bought my morning latte, learning my routine. Photos of him talking to my coworkers, gathering information about my personal life. "How did he know I'd be in the garage that day?" I asked, feeling sick. "He didn't. He'd been following your schedule for 2 weeks. He was waiting for the right opportunity, a moment when you'd be vulnerable and receptive to a kind stranger. The parking garage was just one of many attempts. If it hadn't worked, he would have tried something else. A flat tire he'd offer to fix. A spilled coffee he'd help clean up. A lost dog he'd ask me to help find. The profile says you're a nurse," Agent Rodriguez continued. "He specifically targets women in caring professions because you're predisposed to see the best in people and make excuses for concerning behavior. Everything I'd thought was special about our relationship, the way he understood me, the way he seemed to know exactly what I needed, was just him exploiting my psychology." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Keep documenting everything. We're particularly interested in evidence of the identity theft and the interstate pattern. If we can prove he's running multiple relationships across state lines while committing fraud, we can get federal charges that will stick." She gave me recording equipment and detailed instructions on how to gather evidence safely. "The most important thing is that you don't change your behavior in any way that might alert him," she emphasized. "Marcus is extremely perceptive. If he suspects you know, he'll disappear and start over somewhere else." The weight of that responsibility was crushing. Not just my safety, but the safety of Rebecca, Ashley, Nina, and all the future victims. Back home, I started my double life, loving girlfriend by day, undercover FBI informant by night. Marcus never suspected anything. If anything, he seemed more attentive than usual. He brought me lunch at work, sent sweet text messages throughout the day, planned romantic surprise dates. "You seem a little distant lately," he said one evening while we watched Netflix. "Is everything okay?" "Just tired," I said, the lie coming easily now. "Work's been crazy." "You're working too hard," he said, pulling me closer. "Maybe you should cut back on those extra shifts." He'd been making this suggestion more frequently. Financial dependence was part of his control strategy. The more he could make me rely on him, the harder it would be to leave. "I like the extra money," I said carefully. "But I make enough for both of us," he replied. "I want to take care of you. I recorded everything. 3 weeks into my investigation, Marcus announced another business trip. Denver this time, he said. 3 days. I'll miss you. I knew he was really going to see Emma, who'd been posting increasingly desperate messages about their relationship falling apart. The moment he left, I called Agent Rodriguez. We're going to search the apartment, she said. Do you know where he might hide things? We found everything hidden in a false bottom of his bedroom dresser. USB drives, prepaid phones, fake IDs, and most damning of all, journals. Each journal was labeled with a woman's name and contained detailed plans for manipulation and control. My journal was labeled Sarah Chen, Chicago, Target acquired March 2023. Inside were pages of observations about my habits, my fears, my vulnerabilities, plans for how to manipulate me, notes about my financial situation and family relationships. Subject responds well to small gestures of care. Coffee preference, oat milk latte, extra shot, no foam. Use for daily reinforcement of attentiveness. Mention of absent father during childhood triggers emotional response. Exploit for bonding opportunities and trust building. Works extra shifts at St. Mary's Hospital on weekends. Increasing fatigue makes her more susceptible to suggestion and less likely to question inconsistencies. Best friend Emma shows signs of suspicion. Begin gradual alienation campaign. Suggest Emma is jealous and unsupportive. Mother calls every Sunday at 2 p.m. Interfere with calls by scheduling activities or creating emergencies to establish pattern of unavailability. I was reading detailed notes about how to psychologically manipulate me. Marcus had been studying me like a lab rat from day one. The other journals were worse. They detailed his escalation with previous victims, when to start monitoring their phones, how to isolate them from support systems, when financial coercion became necessary, when physical intimidation was required. Rebecca's journal had pages marked final phase implementation, plans for how to disappear once she became problematic and started asking too many questions about his other relationships. Ashley's journal contained detailed financial information, her social security number, bank account details, credit card numbers. He'd been systematically draining her savings while she thought they were building a life together. Nina's journal had photos of her apartment, her work schedule, her family members. There were notes about her security system and which neighbors were home during the day. I photographed every page with shaking hands, barely able to process the level of calculation involved in his predatory behavior. When Marcus returned from Denver, I was waiting in our living room with Jessica, Agent Rodriguez, and 2 other FBI agents. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, fear, then that cold mask I'd glimpsed once before when I'd mentioned Rebecca's name. What's this about? He asked calmly, setting down his overnight bag like this was a perfectly normal scenario. Agent Rodriguez showed him a warrant. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for interstate stalking, identity theft, wire fraud, and violation of federal restraining orders. Marcus looked directly at me. His expression was almost disappointed, like I'd failed a test he'd expected me to pass. Sarah, whatever they've told you, it's not true. You know me, but I didn't know him at all. I'd fallen in love with a carefully constructed character designed to exploit my weaknesses. I found the journals, I said quietly. For the first time, his composure cracked completely. The mask slipped, and I saw the real Marcus underneath, cold, calculating, furious at being caught. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly as they put the handcuffs on him. As they led him away, he turned back one more time. You'll regret this, he said, not to the agents or Jessica, to me. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The trial took 8 months. 6 women testified about his pattern of abuse. Rebecca spoke from a wheelchair, her injuries still healing. She'd given birth to a daughter, Marcus's daughter, 3 months earlier. He disappeared the day I told him I was pregnant, she said on the witness stand. I haven't heard from him since until the police called about his arrest. Ashley testified about the financial fraud. He'd stolen over $40,000 from her accounts and opened credit cards in her name that she was still paying off. Nina described the stalking and psychological torture, how he'd convinced her to move across the country for a job that didn't exist, how he'd isolated her from her family and friends until she was completely dependent on him. Emma told the court about the physical abuse, how he'd started with playful pushing that gradually became violent, how he'd blamed her for making him angry until she believed it was her fault. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit fraud, identity theft, stalking, assault, violation of restraining orders across multiple states. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 8 years. During the sentencing, his lawyer tried to paint him as a man with abandonment issues who just loved too deeply. Mr. Webb suffered from childhood trauma that led to unhealthy attachment patterns, the defense attorney argued. He never intended to cause harm. He was just desperately seeking connection. The judge wasn't buying it. Mr. Webb treated these women like targets in a hunting expedition, she said. This was calculated predatory behavior, not misguided romance. The level of planning and manipulation demonstrated in these crimes shows a complete lack of empathy and regard for his victim's humanity. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. You studied these women like prey. You learned their weaknesses specifically to exploit them. You destroyed their finances, their relationships, their sense of safety, and in some cases, their physical health. This court finds no evidence of redemption or rehabilitation potential in your behavior. Marcus sat quietly throughout the sentencing, showing no emotion. But as they led him away, he looked back at the gallery where all his victims sat together. He smiled. After the trial, Jessica and I stayed in touch. She'd remarried and was expecting her first child. Rebecca was in physical therapy but making good progress, and her daughter was healthy and beautiful. How are you handling everything? Jessica asked during one of our coffee dates 6 months after the sentencing. Honestly, I was struggling. 2 years of my life had been a complete lie. I'd loved someone who saw me as prey. Worse, I'd ignored clear warnings because I'd been so desperate to believe in the fairy tale. I keep wondering if I'm stupid, I admitted. How did I not see it? You're not stupid, Jessica said firmly. He's just that good at what he does. That's what makes him dangerous. She was right. Marcus had spent years perfecting his technique. He knew exactly how to mirror what we wanted, how to make us feel special and chosen. He'd studied psychology and human behavior the way other people study medicine or law. The FBI profiler said something that helped me, Jessica continued. She said that our capacity for love and trust isn't a weakness. It's what makes us human. The problem isn't that we trusted too easily. The problem is that there are people in the world who exploit that trust. The hardest part was trusting my judgment again. Every date felt like a potential threat. Every kind gesture from a man made me suspicious. Every compliment felt like manipulation. I went to therapy twice a week and joined a support group for survivors of psychological abuse. Slowly, I started to understand that Marcus hadn't just stolen money and time, he'd stolen my ability to trust my own perceptions. He made you doubt your reality, my therapist explained. That's why this kind of abuse is so damaging. It doesn't just hurt your body or your bank account, it damages your sense of self. The other survivors in group therapy had similar stories, not necessarily with romantic partners, but with family members, friends, employers who'd used sophisticated manipulation tactics to control and exploit them. The most insidious part, said Maria, who'd been financially abused by her brother, is how they make you complicit in your own victimization. You start making excuses for them, covering for them, defending them to people who are trying to help you. That's exactly what I'd done with Jessica's warnings. Marcus hadn't needed to silence her. He'd trained me to do it myself. 1 year after Marcus's conviction, I got a call from Agent Rodriguez. He's been running a romance scam from prison, she told me, using contraband phones to target women on dating apps. We're building another case. Even behind bars, he couldn't stop. He'd convinced 3 different women to send him money for legal fees, claiming he was wrongfully convicted. One woman had sent over $5,000 before her sister intervened. How is that possible? I asked. He's extremely persuasive, Agent Rodriguez said. And there are always people willing to believe that everyone deserves a second chance. 2 months later, another woman reached out to me through Jessica. She'd been corresponding with Marcus for 6 months after meeting him through a prison pen pal website. He'd been telling her he was wrongfully convicted, painting himself as a victim of vindictive exes and a corrupt justice system. He seemed so genuine, she wrote in her email, so remorseful and eager to make amends. I was planning to visit him next month. She'd almost believed him until she found the trial records online and read our testimonies. Thank you for speaking up, she wrote. Without your testimony being public record, I might have become victim number 8. That's when I realized something important. Marcus had tried to break me, to make me feel worthless and crazy and small. Instead, he'd made me stronger, and he'd turned his victims into a network of women determined to protect each other. Jessica, the crazy ex he'd warned me about, had saved my life. Rebecca, Ashley, Nina, Emma, and I had saved each other by being brave enough to tell the truth. Now I'm the crazy ex warning his current targets, and I'll keep warning them until he can't hurt anyone else. I started a blog called The Crazy Ex Files, where survivors of psychological abuse share their stories. It gets thousands of views every month from people trying to figure out if their own relationships are healthy. The most common comment is, I thought I was going crazy. That's how manipulation works. It makes you doubt your own perception of reality until you can't trust yourself anymore. But here's what I've learned. If multiple people are warning you about someone, listen. If your friends and family express concern about your relationship, listen. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen. Because sometimes the crazy ex is the only one brave enough to tell the truth. 3 years later, I'm in a healthy relationship with David, a pediatric surgeon I met at a medical conference. He's never once asked me to keep secrets or questioned my friendships. He encourages me to trust my instincts instead of undermining them. When I told him about Marcus, he didn't try to fix me or convince me to get over it. He just listened and then said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. It must have been terrifying." David has met my friends and family. He encourages me to maintain close relationships with them. When Jessica visits Chicago, he insists on cooking dinner for all of us. He treats the other survivors like the heroes they are. "You saved each other," he says. That takes incredible courage. Marcus is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 12 years. Jessica and I are already planning to be there when that hearing comes up. All of us will be there. Every woman he tried to destroy. We'll tell our stories again, as many times as necessary. Some exes really are crazy, but sometimes they're the heroes of the story. And sometimes, the person everyone warns you about really is dangerous. Listen to the warnings. Listen to your gut. Listen to the women who came before you, because we're not crazy. We're survivors.